Wild swings on Dalal Street once again as tensions rise along the line of control. Markets give up gains in late trade to end with minor losses. Mid-caps end with marginal gains.
Money markets also under pressure. The rupee weakens against the US dollar and the 10-year bond yield also hardens in trade.
Bank stocks are the key underperformers, but Allahabad Bank, Dhanalakshmi and Corporation Bank gain after exiting the prompt corrective action framework. Wipro ends in the red after Credit Suisse downgrades the stock. Those were the key highlights from Dalal Street. Hello and welcome to our special show, Markets Today Bordering on Tension. I'm Lata and with me is my colleague Prashant Nair. Markets today were in step with news from the border. First, they opened higher with the confidence that news from both sides indicated that tensions will not escalate. And then fresh news of engagement pushed the markets off highs. Confirmation that Pakistan has captured an Indian Air Force pilot led the Sensex to fall 500 points off highs and the Nifty 130 points below intraday highs. The mid-cap index has still managed some minor gains, which indicates some resilience given the events of the day. The rupee fell to a low of 71.40 or almost 0.5% before recovering, and the Indian bond prices also fell with the 10-year bond yield rising 10 basis points.
It is clear that markets will have to respond to events as they develop. Today, they remain resilient, partly on hopes of the two nations indicated that both did not want to escalate the armed engagement. There was also some sense of positivity for the bulls because the interpretation that was that this engagement, the conflict with Pakistan actually could improve BJP's chances in the general elections, which are not very far away.
But what may we reasonably expect in terms of border news over the next few days, and how will and how should stock and currency markets respond? We have Dhananjay Sinha of MK Global Financial Services and Anant Narayan, Professor of Finance at SP Jain Institute. But before we go to our experts, let's just listen in to the Ministry of External Affairs spokesman Ravish Kumar, who addressed the media a short while ago.
The Pakistan Air Force was detected and the Indian Air Force responded instantly. In that aerial engagement, one Pakistan Air Force fighter aircraft was shot down by a MiG-21 Bison of the Indian Air Force. The Pakistani aircraft was seen by ground forces falling from the sky on the Pakistan side. In this engagement, we have unfortunately lost one MiG-21. The pilot is missing in action. Pakistan has claimed that he is in their custody.
Okay, so that was the most important statement, that there was an armed engagement and, of course, the Pakistan side also saying that they did not target military establishments, which looked a little out of sync with the fact that one Indian MiG had been damaged and one pilot is in their custody. Joining us to discuss these developments and its possible implications on the market are retired Air Marshal Vinod Patni and, as I told you, Anant Narayan, Professor from SP Jain Institute and MK Global Financial Services, Dhananjay Sinha. In a bit, we'll also have Ashwini Gujral to talk about the charts. Mr. Patni, let me first come to you. Just so that, okay, we'll get to Mr. Patni in a minute. Dhananjay, what is your sense of the way the markets have reacted today? There seems to be some resilience that even on a day where we had tense news of one of our pilots being captured, the mid-cap has actually ended in the green.
Yeah, I think the way to really look at this is to really compare this event versus the Uri attack. So essentially, if you look at it, in the earlier events, the market was far more volatile and the correction in the market was very high, and essentially that created an opportunity back then. But today, if you look at it, the market seemed to be far more resilient. There is some correction in the benchmark indices, but I think it hasn't been that disproportionate. So I think there is definitely a sense of resilience that is there. I guess the shock impact of such attacks versus earlier, because I think the market has got really somewhat used to such kind of events. So I think hence possibly the resilience is there. The other aspect that markets seem to be looking at, and the way you have differentiated between the benchmark index and the mid cap index, is basically that there is a hope in the market that with this event the probability of Mr. Narendra Modi coming back to power increases, and hence that is supposed to be more market friendly event outcome. So I think that is what the market seems to be considering. So I think that's how I would sort of characterize the near term reaction of the market.
Dhananjay, but that interpretation about the events really helping Mr. Modi and the BJP, yes, you could have said, well, that was true till yesterday. But, looking at today's events, especially the fact now, the latest information, which is that two of the Indian pilots are in Pakistani custody. So these are not, obviously, no one really anticipated these events. And things may still further sort of escalate because of political compulsions or whatever, right? I mean, the need to look stronger, act, retaliate. So can we say at this point that what has happened so far actually bolsters, the government's chances at the polls in a few months?
So the thing is, I would say I would not really speculate on the chances of a full-fledged war between the two countries. So it might actually linger. So the base case that I'm looking at is possibly this news will linger on for a week or 10 days. And possibly there is certain amount of posturing that is happening, especially in the context of the election that is coming up in India. And also that on the Pakistani side, establishment needs to send certain signal or certain message to the polity out there. So I think there is certain amount of news flow that will be there, and possibly this will sustain for a week time or maybe 10 days time. I think that's how I look at it. I think broader issue is that while the market might actually feel that if Mr. Modi comes back, there will be renewed flow in the market, especially in the mutual funds where we have seen a slackness in the flows. I think that's a possible sort of expectation that the market is sort of building in. But I am not so sort of my assumptions are not so simplistic. My sense is that the flows on the retail side is dissipating. Okay. So if you look at the mutual fund flows that has come off, so that risk continues according to me, and as has been pointed out.
Then I'll come back to you on the flows issue. We wanted more the near-term reaction. And Anant, before I come to you, we've got Air Marshal Patni with us. So let me go to him with two questions that I got from most of the market participants I spoke with. Air Marshal Patni, thank you for joining us. One question is, now, should we be prepared for an escalation? Although both sides have said they don't desire an escalation, the fact that at least one of our pilots is in Pakistan custody indicates that there is escalation ahead?
I don't know. It is not because one pilot is in Pakistan custody that there is a danger of escalation. Escalation is a common phenomenon. It can happen at any time. As long as the two countries are not really at peace, any form of escalation is on the cards. Mm-hmm. This will happen. And I think it would be our bounden duty to be prepared for it.
So, is this capture of our pilot, has this act made us a little vulnerable than we were before? We were on a high moral horse, and obviously the bigger and the larger and the stronger entity of the two, has this opened up a tiny window of vulnerability?
No. Just listen. There were 3 F-16 aircraft, and there were probably a couple of MiG-21 aircraft from our side. Conventional wisdom will suggest that the F-16 is a superior piece of kit. Okay. Now, that superior piece of kit was shot down by a relatively less capable aircraft. Now, that is not something that we should chide over. It actually shows that our pilots did well. Okay. If one in the melee, one of our aircraft also got shot down or whatever happened to it. I don't know. And he landed on the other side. It is neither here nor there. One of their aircraft is lost. One of our aircraft is lost. They have lost a major aircraft. We have lost one of our many. So in this sort of a thing, it's not something that we should be scared about or worried about.
Okay.
An air engagement took place.
Right.
Now it is up to Pakistan to consider as to whether they want yet another air engagement.
Right.
They should actually be conscious of the fact that a F-16 aircraft was shot down by a MiG-21.
Right. Air Marshal,
They should be very concerned.
Right. Air Marshal,
And as far as we are concerned, we should be reasonably happy with the fact that a MiG-21 shot down an F-16.
Air Marshal Patni,
So from that point of view, I think we should not be too worried.
Yeah.
Of course, we are sad that one of our pilots is in Pakistani hands. We are sad. But I am hoping that this time, Pakistan will treat him well and they will return him as soon as possible.
Right. Air Marshal Patni, the question my colleague was asking is whether this can lead to escalation. That was the question, which is, and the reason why we were focusing on this for a bit longer is because if it is not one but two pilots in Pakistani custody, then essentially what you're looking at is a small operation yielding to pretty high optics, right? And can that, because of compulsions on both sides, then sort of lead to escalation of some sort? What's your opinion, sir?
You know, since yesterday, the one word which is most often used on all media channels is escalation.
Yes.
Let me make a suggestion to you. Pakistan says that they have two of our pilots. The Indian government says one pilot missing in action. Who should we believe? If the Indian government says that we have lost two pilots or two pilots are missing in action, then it's a different issue. I don't trust Pakistan. They can say whatever they like. MiG-21 is a single-seater aircraft. Does that mean they destroyed two? I don't think so. It's just a figment of somebody's imagination.
Okay.
If I was to place bets, I would place a bet on this, that it is a single pilot.
Oh, right. Okay, Air Marshal, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much. And going by the nature of things, we will need your advice and your comments in the next few days. And we hope only the next few days. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Well, Anant, you heard the expert opinion on the issue at hand. In the first place, are you surprised by the resilience of all markets today? It actually indicates a little bit of escalation, that there has been an armed engagement and we have lost at least one pilot because the Pakistani army did release pictures.
Well, Lata, first off, I guess we all hope that Wing Commander Abhinandan comes back home ASAP, hale and hearty. Look, I guess the markets are expecting that saner thoughts will prevail eventually. Nobody really expects this to spin out of control. Nobody expects a full-fledged war. Yes, we've taken an action to try and stop the status quo and make sure that, terror attacks stop on us. Yes, Pakistan has its own political compulsions to have a face-saving way out. This has to play out. But the markets expect that this will eventually be brought under control. Hopefully, these are two sane political, establishments which don't really want a full-fledged war. So that's what the market is betting on. And I think that's a fair bet. I think it's absolutely rational to expect that, except that when we are dealing with events like this, it's extremely difficult to time these things. So things could get worse before they get better, but we have to go through it. Specifically on this pilot being lost, etc., while it's obviously extremely troublesome for us and very, very worrisome, remember this happened during Kargil as well. We actually had squadron leader Nachiket, I think, who was captured during that time. And so unfortunately, we've gone through this in the past as well. So this is not necessarily news to us. Also, last bit, I think, people like the RBI would specifically be watching markets very, very closely at times like this. If you have possibilities of people panicking because of events and headlines, that is when our $398 billion of reserves have to be put into use. And I'm sure RBI is watching those markets closely, including the bond markets. If the bond markets were to overreact to headlines or events, I think they will step into place. So I think it's fair to assume that, normalcy will return soon, and hopefully before long we will be discussing boring topics like current account deficit or quarterly results rather than what's happening on the border.
Okay, all right. Dhananjay, now what's the advice immediately? Where if there are these disturbing news from the border, will you be a buyer? And if you are, where are you looking for value? Which stocks?
So the thing is, the way I look at it is that irrespective of the current event, and I'm hoping that it is not going to last beyond a week or 10 days. But in the short term, definitely a sort of a weakening in currency and hardening in the yields will have certain implication for the rate sensitive sectors such as capital goods, banking sector, NBFCs, etc. So those will be impacted. But I think if I look at beyond the event as well, so if you look at the current situation, we do see a sort of a liquidity deficit in the banking system where the LAF balance is ahead of 1.5 trillion rupees. So I think the mismatch on the liquidity side is still there. And I think that will continue to remain elevated at least till March end. So I think the rate sensitive is something that I'm avoiding. What I'm liking is more like the IT stock. We believe that the deflation and recession risks that the market had been pricing in has actually gone away. So you look at the break-even inflation in the US has gone up to almost like 1.6%. From -3%. So I think IT sector is going to do well, and alongside I think the rupee will also sort of somewhat depreciate, and there is certain rebound in commodity space. So we look at commodity sector, especially the steel segment, which I would be betting on. So overall, some of these things will be there. Also, I think on the consumer space, if there are corrections based on this event, I think those are the things that I will pick up. Maybe some in auto space as well, two-wheelers, for instance. Government is going to be pump priming, especially in the rural and agri sector. That will add to the demand side.
Okay. Yeah. Got that. So positive on consumer items, especially FMCG, and positive on IT. But doubting interest rate sensitives. In fact, that would be Anand's favourite topic. Where do interest rates head from here? Where does the currency head? What is its range? And more importantly, the point you mentioned about flows drying up. Anand, now what should one be prepared for in terms of a range and direction for the exchange rate and for the 10-year bond yield?
Well, Lata, until this event is behind us and until we come to a stage where peace is restored, unfortunately, we will respond to headlines. And therefore, in markets like this, you can't deal on events. It's extremely difficult to do that. So it's best to sit through this process, grit your teeth. I don't think anything big is going to happen on the currency markets because, as I mentioned earlier, RBI is there with a war chest precisely for times such as this. I think we have to worry about how peace is eventually achieved, and therefore, how do we take fundamentals going forward? Likewise with the 10-year bond yield, I think there's nervousness. Yes, of course, there are other worries about the size of the fiscal deficit, the borrowing program, demand-supply mismatch for bonds, and so on and so forth. Those things will continue to weigh on the markets. Any short-term panic reaction because of what we see on headlines, I think is best ignored. In both the bond markets and the currency markets, I think RBI will be there to douse the tension. But I do take a lot of heart from what both sides are saying. Nobody wants an escalation, at least officially. People are offering olive branches to each other. I think it's fair to assume as a base case that life will eventually come to some kind of normalcy, and we'll forget about this as a bad nightmare.
Dhananjay, you throw this conflict into the mix of already uncertain kind of variables, flows being one of them. Is this going to sort of get a collective अब elections के बाद देखेंगे type reaction from investors, both local and foreign?
So I think our view has been that retail participation in equity market is not structural, and we have been of the view that it will dissipate, and that's what we have seen over the last 1.5 years. So if you look at the flows over December and January, mutual fund net equity flows has been roughly about 5,000 crores, and within that the discretionary flow has been a negative of roughly about 3,000 crores. So SIP continues, and wherein we have seen that there are equal number of discontinuation of portfolio versus new portfolio. So I think overall it does look like the domestic support to the market has actually come off considerably, and that has reflected in the mid cap and the small cap segment. And if you look at the current scenario, I would say that while you might have a certain the sentimental impact that this will increase the probability of this event will increase the probability of Mr. Modi coming back to power, and that seemed to be also getting into a view that you will have a rebound in the retail flows. I guess that can actually be a sort of a misplaced assumption, because I think the fundamental issue of liquidity being short is there and very much evident in the banking system, wherein you're seeing deposit growth not really happening. So I think I would still refrain from getting into deep value deep value sort of opportunities in the mid cap and small cap space, especially in the small cap space. I will wait for another couple of months, maybe after the budget, after the election is when I would look for better opportunities.
All right. Completely out of time, Dhananjay and Anand, thank you very much for joining us. So key takeaways from our guests actually that the tension from the border perhaps may not be a very important determinant of the market, because of course both sides have spoken of de-escalation, and also as Anand points out, the Reserve Bank will ensure stability in the FX and bond markets. But actually the negativity, as Dhananjay points out, could be coming from the flows drying up, and even with a positive spin that the border events could lead to the NDA government coming back, these flows may still not return. And so the problem for the market is flows and not really border news. We wrap up this edition of Markets Today.